I'm going to share with you tonight 8 tips on public speaking. I've got a couple of Chinese people in the audience. 8 is a lucky number, one of my lucky numbers as well. That's why I picked 8. So tonight's less structured, unlike most other education sessions. I'm merely going to share with you some tips that I've picked up over the last 25, 30 years of speaking that work for me. One thing I have done on the journey is that I've read a dozen, 15, 20 books on public speaking. So I went through my library and picked out 3 or 4 that were probably the most valuable for me. So, why don't I start with those? One of my favourites, and I couldn't find this particular book in my library, so I suspect I've lent it to someone and not got it back. But it's this one by a gentleman by the name of James Humes. And it's Speak Like Churchill, Stand Like Lincoln. I learned a lot from this book. And if there's one thing I could suggest about reading public speaking books, I'm not sure if you do the listening to them is going to have the same effect on you as if you actually read them. Because you can go back and reread them, and that would be my suggestion. Speak Like Churchill, Stand Like Lincoln, James Humes, one of my favourites. Whilst we're on the subject of James Humes, I think I read that first and then picked up another one of his books called Podium Humour. Now, we've all known how important humour is, but this particular book, and there are numerous others about incorporating humour into public speaking, you'll realise when you read books like this how structured humour is. I used to think many years ago, he's just a funny bastard. But funny bastards learn how to be funny bastards. That's what happens. So that's what happens. There's a lot of structure in here, and there's a lot of technique in delivering jokes and different styles. And when you study them, it's quite amazing that you can actually learn whether they're using the reversal technique, whether they're using the exaggeration technique, and a whole bunch of others. So that's a whole separate subject on its own. But that's one good starter if you want to read a good book, is Podium Humour by James Humes. Another one, Doug Maloof, How to Be the Best Speaker in Town. Easy to read, simple. How to Be the Best Speaker in Town by Doug Maloof. That's one that I enjoyed. And another one of my favourites, I remember learning a lot out of this particular one, by Nick Morgan. It's called Working the Room. And just even the title appealed to me on that one, because working the room is something that if you're a good speaker, you want to absolutely work the room and get everyone engaged and attentive. Working the Room by Nick Morgan. And if you go and Google some books, to see public speaking books, one that you'll come up with, which I don't rate anywhere near as highly as I do those, is How to Deliver a TED Talk. We've all seen the TED Talks on YouTube. They're good. Some people are good. Others aren't as good. I'd have to say, I didn't learn as much out of that as I did out of those others. So there's the start of the books. Next tip, AV equipment. I'm not using any AV equipment tonight because I don't trust this particular piece of AV equipment. Mike uses it reasonably successfully most of the time. But even something like the remote control isn't working because it needs batteries. And I've never found that having a computer sitting here or here trying to do that, you're talking to everybody and we're trying to get this happening and hang on, I'll get this sorted, and what happens when you come up to do a speech and you're trying to get that organised, you have lost the audience already. You get one opportunity. You walk up here, you stand at the lectern, or the stage without the lectern, your choice. You have one opportunity to engage. If you're walking up and doing and this and that doesn't work, you've just completely lost the audience. You might be able to regain their attention, but what's the point of losing them to start with? I have used this successfully a few times, but there's a skill in being able to use it. You want to be able to use the AV equipment seamlessly. Almost so that if you're saying, okay, now the next slide is click, and you just click it on your, so it doesn't, no one's even thinking that you're using it. I've used AV in big seminar rooms, but I've had AV operators at the back of the room. So, that's when you know you can use them because you know these people are going to have it all organised. So, if you're going to use AV equipment, make sure it is 100%, 200% accurate, going to work, not going to let you down. Because if it lets you down and you're in front of 200 people, you're going to feel the heat big time. So just my advice is use AV equipment sparingly with the full knowledge you're going to be able to use it, or not at all. The other little point I'd make, I've seen some people of late come up with phones and start scrolling through phones like so. I think that's the AV equipment equivalent of notes. So my personal view again is notes are going to be more effective, because you don't have to, if you've got 2 pages of notes in front of you, you don't have to touch anything. So again, it's less, well, with my eyes you won't be able to see the phone anyway, so that's why I wouldn't do it, but I've seen this before. It's distracting, you're losing that connection with the audience, so just be a bit careful about that. Tip number 3, know the room and know the audience. So if you're going to present in a work environment to a new client, for example, know the clients, know who's going to be there. I've been asked to present to corporations and clubs and things like that. What I've always done is ask the organiser if I could please come and see the room first. So I've been in to have a look at the room, and even a room like this, I've walked in, become familiar with it. Yes, there's AV equipment. How reliable is it? Not very good. Okay, thank you. I'm not going to use it. That sort of thing. So just know the room, and you'll find really professional speakers, most of them. The reality is, really professional speakers who walk into any room and just nail it. But knowing the room you're walking into is really important. So, and one of the ones that I did many years ago was at the Grand Hyatt Hotel, and that was 300 people in the room. That's when I had one of those AV people at the back, so I knew what I was going to. So as soon as I walked in, I wasn't intimidated by this grand ballroom, because I knew what I was walking into, so it was all just calm. So know the room, know the audience. Tip number 4. I prefer if you would avoid public speaking cliches. The one that you'll hear a lot of people use, particularly in MC, and they'll do a bit of blurb, yada yada yada. Without further ado, now I'd like to introduce my hairs stick up on the back of my head when I hear without further ado. Probably because I've learnt the craft. I know that it's someone doing an infill word who's inexperienced. And I get let down when I'm listening out in the world, listening to someone do that, because I think, no, you're up there in front of this big group, you've got to be good. That's my view. You've got to be good. And without further ado, it tells me they're not good. So I might be a bit prejudiced in everything. The other one that a lot of people use in Toastmasters, because I suspect it's in a manual somewhere, I've never done it, and that is about being very structured or formulaic in your delivery. For example, and I think this is almost a markdown if you don't do it, if you're in a public speaking Toastmaster competition, where someone will come up and say, you know, ladies and gentlemen, da 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 da, blah 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 blah. So a bit of an intro, and then I'll say, Mr. Chairman, Toastmasters and guests, yada yada yada. So they bring that in after they've already given you a few sentences. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But when I hear people do that, my thought is, here's that formula again. You're sounding very structured and so formulaic. And I'll tell you this, out again in the public speaking seminar space, if someone knows you do Toastmasters, you may actually get asked, oh, thank you, no, we don't want you to speak because you're a Toastmaster because you're regimented in a certain way and therefore you're not the sort of person we want. I've heard that said. So I think what we do is wonderful. I'm just suggesting try not to be so formulaic and so structured that it's obvious you're a Toastmaster. One tip number 5 for the novices. Never declare you are a novice and this is your first time at whatever the task might be. Get here, assume the position of authority. You've been entrusted with that role. Give it your best shot. Because you're undermining your own credibility if you do that. So that I couldn't emphasise that more strongly. Never undermine your own credibility by saying, oh, this is my first time at doing whatever. Okay. Tip number 6. Writing for speaking is a lot different to writing for reading. That requires a training session all on its own. But I'll just give you a quick example of what I mean. Now, some of you were here when I gave a speech probably 2 or 3 sessions ago about Marsha Brady. Remember that one?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. If you write a speech for reading, it's going to look like that. And most people, when they start out writing the speeches, write like that. Because we've all been taught to write for reading, and no one on the planet, at school at least, has been taught how to write for speaking. You've got to throw the rule book out, and you've got to learn how to write for speaking. So I'm just going to show you how I laid out. Again, it'd be nice if I had the AV working, but I'm not trusting it. So I'm just going to put that there. That is an outline, and you see how I've got short sentences. Forget about punctuation. Punctuation is not relevant when you write for speaking. So you've got to get rid of that brainwash that you've got and just write in short lines, because each line is basically a short breather, not necessarily a pause. If you want to do a pause, you could put in, asterisks or whatever you want to do to tell yourself when you want to do a pause. And I made this mistake many years ago, I was being introduced as a guest speaker at a Rotary function. And I gave the introduction and I wrote next to it, pause. You know, the guy was reading it and said, pause. I just got it wrong, so that's okay. Now, I'm showing you that there. I know it might be, your eyes are like mine, difficult to read. But you see there how I've written it. It said, do you remember your first true love? I do. It's often said, you never forget your first true love. And I think that's true. And I have fond memories of mine. In fact, I remember mine, yada, yada, yada. You see how I've just delivered it? But the writing of it helped me with that cadence of the delivery. That's the difference. Write for your speaking cadence, not for what looks good in a paragraph. The school teacher's going to go, oh, that's very good. Like that. So that's very important. So we'll almost need to do a separate session on that one day, and we'll do that next time. So writing for speaking is different to writing for reading. Number 7, practice. There is nothing more incongruent than standing in a room at home on your own, speaking. You get used to it when it becomes normal. You know, and some people do it in front of a mirror. Other people would argue in front of a mirror is unnatural because that's not what you're going to be seeing. You're not going to be seeing yourself when you're speaking. But practicing is, and even videoing yourself and then watching yourself back, that can be pretty effective as well. But it's something a lot of people just don't do. I remember one time I was practicing at home, and I was in the front room, and my wife walked in, and where she's so used to it now, that I'm sort of walking up and down, talking like this, and practicing my lines, and she just sort of walked in, put some things in the cupboard, and walked straight back, just didn't blink, because she's just so used to it. So it's just, once you become accustomed to that, but it is, we're all taught when we were young, now speaking to yourself as the first time going mad, you just got to get over it and just do it. So it is really, and then in fact, I've had to do speeches where I've had to have a microphone. You've got to learn how to use that properly too. So, you get the, I won't use this, but you get the microphone and you've got to hold it at a certain distance. And there's another thing where I remember another time I was speaking at a Liberal Party function. And it was the Speakers Club, and I was there to give some pointers to people on speaking. And there were a couple of other people who got up there and spoke before me, and the microphone was one of those ones that attached to the lectern, and it was sort of just out here. And as people were speaking, it's just, you can sort of get a little bit of it, but you couldn't get a lot of good lucid clarity over it. So I walked out and straight away, just instinctively, I went boom like that. And then they could all hear me. So the voice went up, I got everyone's attention, and my wife was in the room that day. She's, a staunch critic. Even she complimented on that. She said that sort of gave you so much presence, the fact that you took control of the microphone and moved. So, if there's a microphone involved, control the microphone. Practice if it's going to be a handheld microphone. Practice at home with that as well. Worthwhile. Final point, number 8. I sort of touched on it a little bit earlier. Study humour. Now, I've given you one book, but many years ago I did a course, Public Speaking Incorporating Humour, by a guy who was a comedian back in the 1960s and 70s. He was on the Graham Kennedy show and all that sort of stuff. Very famous, in Melbourne tonight, in its era. And he trains did then, he trained comedians. That was his job. So he had all these sessions where he trained comedians. And he was explaining to us about these different structures of the different techniques that you could use. And by the second or third session, we were writing our own jokes. And it just seems, it was such a revelation to me at the time that you could actually write your own joke. We didn't know anything about humour. I mean, myself and the several other guys were in the session. We didn't know anything about that. But I actually learned and realised you can write your own humour. So it's something that, again, you start off studying a little bit of it academically. There will be other books on, delivery humour. I'm sure there'll be comedians would have a whole. In fact, he was one of his most proud things that he owned was a library of humour books. There was so much written on it. It's amazing. So study humour. It will help with your delivery. Even listening to comedians. You can sometimes at lunchtime I sort of scroll through and on Instagram and watch different comedians. And when I do now, I say, he's using that technique and they're using that technique. So I just get it. So it's great because, and then you pick up different things. Oh, that's a really good thing, clever thing to say, and you weave something into your next speech or something like that. So they're the final 8 tips. Allow me to recap. The next education session, I'll pick one of those, whichever you decide you like, and I'll elaborate on it, okay? But I hope that those 8 tips keep you in good stead and help you with your, as we've said many times, your quest for self-development.